Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Jerry, for the introduction. As Jerry said, we've known each other for a long time through the Canada organization. I think many of you know Jerry, and I don't know too many people that are more dedicated or harder working for their jobs or for the causes that they're behind it. I know Jerry's involved in a lot of them. So thanks, Jerry, for the invitation to come here today to speak to you about some of the things that we're doing at Whitecap and to learn from the speakers and the other people that are here today. I also want to thank the Chief. He's not here right now, but thank him for the welcome song this morning. It's much appreciated to be here in their territory. And on behalf of Chief Darcy Bear from the Whitecap Dakota First Nation and his council, I want to say Hokada, which means hello friend in Dakota, and bring greetings on behalf of the Whitecap Dakota First Nation. We've allowed me to come here today and spend some time with you. Gord had sent me some information kind of prior to, and I was doing a little bit of research looking at kind of the comparisons of Saskatchewan and BC to see what kind of comparisons there were. And obviously we're both facing kind of the same kind of things as far as rural people moving to urban centers. I went on Stats Canada numbers, and if you can believe those, it talks about the national average in Canada being about 20% of the population being rural. Here in BC about 15%, and in Saskatchewan about 35%. And in Saskatchewan, we're challenged with people moving from rural to urban. And for many, many years, we've been challenged with people moving from rural to outside the province, to other places. We've exported people for a long time. But that doesn't concern us because that's all part of our strategy to take over the country. We're infiltrating When I came and registered, the young lady that was there said, "Oh, my husband grew up in Regina," so I was just assuring me that the plan is all working. As a matter of fact, the largest city in Saskatchewan is no longer Regina, it is no longer Saskatoon, it is now Calgary. So, I'm going to do a presentation today and talk about some of the things that we're doing at Whitecap on the economic development side that Jerry mentioned. And it's not that these are the way to do things. This is one of the options for how we've done it, and it seems to work for us in our situation. And I was listening to Jonathan's presentation this morning, and a lot of the themes that he was talking about came through in the things that we're trying to do. So I think a lot of people are on the common ground here when we talk about trying to make efforts to retain our rural economic development and self-sustainability. So I'll go through a little bit about Whitecap. I'll go through a little bit about what we've done on building a sustainable foundation. We've spent a lot of time doing that before actually getting into business development. And then I'll talk about what that business development has meant for Whitecap and the surrounding area. Whitecap has a long history of being in the area where we are now. The traditional territory of the Whitecap people, they're Dakota. They're part of the Sioux tribe, Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota. And the traditional territory actually runs for a large portion of Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and then a huge portion of the northern U.S. So it's across both borders. Historically, the Dakota people have allied with the British, and the word Dakota actually means ally. And hopefully you'll see that theme coming through in our presentation as far as being allies, being partners, developing relationships. But the Dakota people always allied with the British. In a lot of the wars that you see there. And the signing of the treaty at Ghent after the War of 1812 ended in about 1814, they created the border between the U.S. and then British territory. And a lot of the Dakota people were caught on the opposite side of the border in the U.S. with the people who they'd fought against. And when they came back to British territory and brought the medals and blankets they'd received and the flags from the British, they asked to sign treaties with the British. And they were told, no, you're American Indians, you should sign a treaty in the U.S. So to this day, Whitecap has never been able to sign a treaty in Canada. So it's one of the files we're working on right now. And it ties in to the land base. Whitecap's a small community relative to a lot of First Nations in the country, maybe not so much with BC, because there's a lot of First Nations in BC with small territories. Sorry. Bit of a delay here. So we've got about 5,000 acres. We're south of the city of Saskatoon, 20 minutes to a half hour south. And we've been in that location for that reserve since 1879. And Chief Whitecap, who established that reserve back then, is also credited as being one of the founding fathers of the city of Saskatoon, along with John Lake. John Lake came from the east to set up a temperance colony, and Chief Whitecap showed him what the best place would be to set up his city, or his temperance colony, which has now become Saskatoon, and has now become kind of our major market for our economic development. So a lot of good foresight on behalf of the chief back in the day. Also a small population base that we work with. We've got about, am I pointing this in the right direction here? There we go. About 630 people as far as members. Our on-reserve population is about 550, of which about 420 are actually members. And what's happening at Whitecap is we have a growing population. It's growing very fast. It's still small, but it's growing very fast percentage-wise. And we've got a lot of non-members coming to Whitecap to live, and a lot of non-status people who want to come and live there now too. So we've got a fast-growing community, which I guess in the rural situation is kind of a bit of an anomaly. So there's some explanation as to why those things are happening. So what is our economic development motivation at Whitecap? These are the things that we look to as to why we want to do economic development and business development. We're trying to create our own self-sufficiency. We're trying to generate revenues for the Whitecap government. Obviously employment opportunities for not only our members, but the people that live in Whitecap and the area. We want to improve the quality of life. So we're looking for the same kinds of things that everybody else is in their communities. We want to participate in the regional economy, which is something that traditionally hasn't happened for most First Nations, especially those that fall under the Indian Act. Because the Indian Act was never really set up to do business. It was kind of set up to segregate First Nations onto those little islands and reserves. So we're trying to integrate into the regional economies. This is our mission statement. Like many mission statements, it's a bit of a mouthful, but there's some key pieces in here that I just kind of want to pull out. So it goes back to our motivations, the self-sustaining community piece, financially independent members. We want to use the tools that we have at our disposal, and we want to respect the environment and our Dakota culture, which has been talked about this morning. So fairly straightforward, nothing out of the ordinary with regards to what our motivation is. How we're doing it is a bit of a long-term approach. And it's a challenge in First Nation communities, as it is in a lot of rural communities, with regards to how the politics are set up. So if you look at politics in most First Nations, terms are either 2 years or sometimes 3 years for politicians. So they've got 2 years to 2 or 3 years to get something to happen so they can get reelected. So if you're a new chief and council coming in, it probably takes you 6 months to a year to figure out what's actually been going on and what's going on. And then you've got about 6 months to do something, and then you're back into campaign mode again. So a lot of communities, a lot of people try and hit a home run because that's what's going to get people reelected and get you back into government again. But 9 times out of 10, that doesn't actually work. You know, the law of swinging for the fence has a low probability of happening usually. We've taken a longer-term approach, and we're fortunate in that we've had stable government at Whitecap for a long time. Chief Darcy Barrow was elected chief when he was 25 years old. He was on council when he was 22, and he's served over 20 years now as the chief of Whitecap Dakota First Nation. So that's allowed us to take a longer-term approach to our economic development strategies. So before we've got to implementing projects, we've worked through kind of setting a foundation of rules, regulations, how things are going to work. And it's not sexy work, but it's stuff that needs to be done in order to make the sexy stuff like business development happen. At least I think business development is sexy.
That's okay.
So if you're coming to invest or to lend money as a bank would in a community or somewhere, you're going to want to know what are the rules. And unfortunately, in a lot of First Nation communities, there's not a lot of rules around business development or investment, simply again because the Indian Act, where it applies, was not set up that way. We've opted out of the Indian Act and into the First Nation Land Management Act. It's another piece of federal legislation that allows chief and council to manage their lands, as opposed to having to go to the minister and have the minister sign off every time you want to do a land lease or do something in the community. It allows you to move at the speed of business. So that's what we've done. We're actually in our second generation for the Whitecap Land Code. We did a referendum vote, got a code adopted, and then CMHC, some of the banks said, you know, we need to have some changes in order to do business with Whitecap, so we've made those changes, and now we're in our second generation land code. And now we're developing other kinds of rules and regulations in order for business to happen on a First Nation reserve. Things like development servicing agreements. Somebody talked earlier about not having high-speed internet or not having enough infrastructure in your community. Well, this is one way where we can offload the cost of that to the businesses that are coming into our community by making them pay for part of that through development servicing agreements. Things that are as simple as business licensing bylaws, are not kind of standard in First Nation communities. You've got to develop those kinds of rules. Environmental management. Environmental management in most cases, environmental laws, regulations are provincial regulations and don't necessarily apply on federal lands like Indian reserves. We had a situation where we thought, where one of our band members thought he was an entrepreneur and he had partnered with a company in the city of Saskatoon and they were doing some work with metal, and we didn't really know what it was doing, but all of a sudden you'd see fires in the middle of the night on the reserve on his land and wonder, what's going on over there? Well, it turns out they were hauling wire that was plastic coated out to the reserve, burning the plastic off and then reclaiming the copper. Well, they went ahead and made a mess of the land, and it had to be cleaned up. It cost $250,000 to do that. Under federal law for environment, that person got a $1,000 fine. That was the most that the federal law can do under those situations. Provincial law is where all the teeth is, but it doesn't apply on federal land. So things like that have kind of forced us to get into our own environmental management laws. Things like that. And in most cases, what we do is we don't create our own, the wheels that were put up there, square wheel and the round wheel, the province has had environmental laws for a long time now. Why would we create our own? Why wouldn't we just adopt theirs and have them apply in our own community under our own jurisdiction and enforce them? So they're not provincial laws, but there are laws, but they're the same as the province's laws. So that way, if you come in to do business in Whitecap, you know what the rules are, because they're the same as what you've experienced off reserve. And we're also in consultation and discussions, negotiations with Canada on a self-government agreement right now. Taxation. Taxation is an interesting word with First Nation communities. Taxation is often a bad word in First Nation communities because of the tax exemption status of First Nations. In our community, the chief brought forward the discussion of taxation with our community and with our elders. Most governments operate on the revenues of some sort of taxation. And First Nation governments, at least the Whitecap government, looked at this and said, if we're going to be a government, we need to create our own source of revenues. Is taxation one of the ones that we want to go into? And under treaty, even though we're not treaties exempt First Nation governments from taxation from other levels of governments. The discussion in Whitecap was, should we tax our own people? And the elders said, back in the day, we had our own kind of model of taxation. It was called sharing. We had buffalo hunters, right? They hunted all the buffalo. They didn't eat them all, they shared them with the community. We had moccasin makers, they made moccasins. They didn't wear them all, they shared them with the community. Everybody had a role and everybody shared, right? But when the system across the ocean came here, that's where the system of taxation was used to redistribute wealth. So First Nations had a redistribution of wealth system called sharing. That was essentially a type of taxation. So the elders said we need to have that, redistribution of the wealth. And there's not a, it's not a problem having our own system of taxation and taxing ourselves if we're going to redistribute the wealth, create our own source of revenues, and reinvest it back in our communities. So we have property tax on our Whitecap community. Most of the businesses are owned by the Whitecap Dakota First Nation. They get taxed just like all the other businesses do. So my development corporation gets taxed. We pay those property taxes to the Whitecap government. They reinvest them in education and health and paved roads and housing and all those things that we don't get enough federal transfer payments for. So it's a source of own source revenue. Federal government's applying GST on the reserve. We said, well, we really have jurisdiction for taxing. Maybe we should apply our own tax and you should opt out of the GST taxation jurisdiction. So we did that. So there is no GST. We're a GST-free zone. That's the good news. The bad news is you still pay 5%. You pay Whitecap Community Improvement Fee. So nobody knows the difference. But there is 5% that now doesn't go to Harper's pocket. It goes to Chief Bear's pocket. It doesn't go to Chief Bear's pocket. It goes to reinvest back into the community. So we've taken over jurisdiction for GST in Whitecap. Same thing with liquor consumption taxes, because we have liquor outlets in some of our business. We've taken over the 10% liquor tax that everybody was paying in Whitecap. Nobody really knew, but every time you were having a beverage, there was a 10% tax going to the province. We said the same thing. You're the province, you really don't have jurisdiction to tax in our area, but we do. we'll apply that same tax. Level playing field, that's kind of the thing that we were trying to do. So we create some own source revenues for us that then we can do some of the self-sustaining things that we want to do. Again, the provincial one was interesting because under the Indian Act, there's not an allowance for a First Nation to do consumption fees. It's not allowed under the Indian Act. So we had to go and get the finance minister in Saskatchewan to approve it at his level. Then we had to go to then Minister Flaherty with the federal government. He had to then go to get an order in cabinet to allow us to actually do this, just to be able to apply our own taxation. So that was the first one in Canada that was done. But we've delved into that, and I know Chief Bear has taken some heat from other First Nation leaders saying taxation is not something we should do. But that's something that works for Whitecap and that we've moved ahead with, and our council's moved ahead with. Land use planning, we've only got 5,000 acres, so we need to use it wisely. It's one of our resources in our mission statement that we want to use to the highest and best use. So we've got ahead and zoned the whole community. And we learned that from some of the communities actually out here in BC, where they have a lot of development. When we talked to them, they said, you know, back in the day, we were happy to be leasing land, and we were handing out leases because we were just so happy people that wanted to come and invest in our communities. But we really didn't plan it out, so now we've kind of got some residential and some commercial with the retail and the school kind of all mixed together. We would have kind of planned it out better and zoned it. So we've zoned the whole community into resource conservation, special use, industrial, business, residential, those kind of things. So again, it's not maybe something that's in most First Nations, but if you're an investor or a bank, it's something that you recognize as how things are done in other jurisdictions. Under the land code, we can't sell the reserve land, but we can do 99-year leases, 99-year commercial, 99-year residential leases. They're all, security can be registered, banks can come in, mortgage lending can be provided. We're 20 minutes, half hour out of Saskatoon. A few years when we were starting to get ready to do our development, we didn't have high-speed internet. We didn't even have cell service out there, actually, to be able to have cell coverage. So we invested about $12 million into infrastructure to bring all of that into the community to be able to get ready to attract and do business. The way we were able to do that is by borrowing money that can then be paid back by property tax and our other sources of revenue. Partnership was one of the themes for us, working with people, developing relationships, developing partnerships. Chief Bear was big on partnerships. When he first got into council, he went door knocking. He went to the RMs, he went to the towns around the area and said, I'm Chief Bear and we're going to do some things different because the reserve community was in a serious, serious financial problem. They had a bad reputation, they owed everybody money. And he reached out and said, we're going to do things different and I want to know what you guys are doing. They said, well, you know, nobody's ever come to say hi and find out what we're doing. We kind of always wondered what you guys were doing over there, but we never kind of went over and said hello to our neighbors. So now, you know, we all know each other in the area. We work together on different kinds of strategies. We do partnerships with the Government of Canada. As an example, the Canada Builds Fund for infrastructure. People might be familiar with that, where you can apply for infrastructure money. Didn't apply to First Nations in the past. We said, well, why not? Why wouldn't we be able to access that money to build infrastructure, to create regional employment, regional development? Now they've changed the program so First Nations can apply to that. We work with the province. The province has invested in housing on our community, in health, in education, in things that they don't normally do because, again, we're taking a regional approach. We've got partnerships with the Saskatoon Health District, public schools, fire protective services, things like that. Financing relationships. If you've ever tried to do business on reserve, it can be extremely difficult to borrow money and get security on reserve. But these are the financiers that are now kind of working in Whitecap's area because of the rules and the regulations that we've laid down. Partnerships, we've got a small community I mentioned, so we need to get labor from other places. One of our big projects we built was a casino. And we built it kind of at a heyday of construction in Saskatchewan. And they said, you're going to have a hard time getting tradespeople. You're going to have a hard time getting the project done on budget and on time. And I was talking at the table about the Aboriginal and First Nation labor force. That if we can engage that young labor force, that's an answer to a lot of our problems with regards to labor for the future. And we went to the city of Saskatoon. We went to one of the training institutes and we said, we know we're building this big project over the next 2.5 years. We know when we're going to need drywallers. We know when we're going to need electricians and carpenters. You start getting a list of the First Nation apprentices and First Nation people, those skills together. We'll phone you ahead of time. You send them out. The subcontractors will interview them, and then some of them might get hired. And we ended up with over 45,000 First Nation labor hours on that project. Graham Construction took a ton of those people with them onto the next job and started apprenticing them. It came in under budget and ahead of schedule through that partnership. The road to Whitecap has been terrible for years and years and years. And we knew that the provincial government wasn't going to build a highway to Whitecap just because we asked them to. So we went and talked to all the surrounding RMs, and we talked to all the towns, and we said, you know, we've got a great lake, Diefenbaker, one of the top 10 fishing lakes just south of Whitecap. Whitecap's in between Saskatoon and the lake. Why don't we create a tourism corridor from Saskatoon to Lake Diefenbaker that just happens to go through Whitecap? And it would be a great economic idea. And we said, well, actually pay 10%. We'll kick in gravel, you RM kick in gravel, you maintain roads for a while, we'll all do this. We went to the province and they said, well, nobody's ever offered to pay for a provincial highway or part of it, so we'll do it. So they did. So we ended up with a $46 million highway upgrade that went from Saskatoon all the way down to Lake Diefenbaker. Year 2 of the project, it's supposed to be a 5-year project. Year 2 of the project, the province comes to us and says, you know, Chief, we don't have the money in the budget this year, and it's getting too late to get a project manager and a construction company to do it, so we're just going to delay it till next year. And we all know what happens when the province starts talking delays, right? It never actually gets done. And Chief Bear is, you know, when you tell him no, that kind of just encourages him to get out there and do more. So we went and got 3 letters of credit from banks for $10 million each, and we said, here, province, here's your money, just pay us back next year when you got it in your budget, right? Let's get on. So they didn't really want that headline that we were lending them money to build provincial highways. So miraculously, they found the money in the budget. But they said it's still too late, right? So we said, well, we'll do it. You know, we'll project manage, we'll find a contractor. So they said, well, have at it. So we did. So we built that next section, and they said, well, that seemed to work pretty good. Why don't you just build the rest? So we built all the rest of the highway under a contract for the province. And then our partner said, well, why don't we call it Chief Whitecap Trails? So it's a designated tourism corridor now. That rolled into a whole regional tourism strategy for the lake, for the community, for a whole big surrounding area of tourism development that we continue to upgrade and we continue to do today in partnership with everybody around us. So those are kind of some of the foundation pieces that we laid into place. So then it's, okay, what kind of businesses are we going to do and why are we going to do it? And number one for us has always been profitability. It's often a bad word to say profits and make money. It seems that way anyways. In a lot of First Nation communities, and we were no different when we started out, we had 60–70% unemployment. We said, you know, employment is kind of the key. But if you're not making money, the jobs are going to be short-lived and you're going to go out of business. So that's the criteria that we use for our business development. The structure we have is pretty straightforward as far as a corporate structure. Our members are the shareholders. We've got a separate board of directors that's appointed by our chief and council. Chief Bear is the chairman of my board. I'm the CEO, and then we've got a number of different partnerships and joint ventures and companies that we roll in underneath that. As part of our planning, tourism is a major part of one of our strategies. We've planned about 600 acres on the reserve, and then we started developing those projects. Dakota Dunes Golf Links was the first one we did about 10 years ago. It was the best new course in Canada when we built it. So we built it to a high standard. Interestingly enough, I started working for the Saskatoon Tribal Council in 1986. So it's about 30 years ago. This was the first project I worked on, was a golf course in Whitecap. We could never get it financed. It got shelved. And then 20 years later, the rules were in place to do it, and it got financed, and now it's operating with a couple other First Nation partners. We then built a casino, about a $62 million project, about 80,000 square feet. And again, in partnership with 6 other First Nations. And interesting, the management company is a partnership of all 74 First Nations in Saskatchewan that manages this casino for us. And they manage 5 others too. So it's all about partnerships. And this creates a big part of the jobs and the traffic that comes to Whitecap. Next project on the books is a hotel to make it a destination resort. And then we've got about 335 residential units that will come into play kind of down the road after that as part of our tourism master plan. Somebody mentioned this morning about diversifying your economy, not having all your eggs in one basket, and so we had a lot of them in the tourism side of things, the hospitality side of things. So we've now ventured out and taken some of our lands to develop a small business, kind of light industrial commercial park to create some jobs in those areas for community members and others. About 54 acres in the first phase of it. We're in an area where there's a lot of mining and resource development too. So we started up our own construction company so that when people want to move into our park and they need a building built, we can build the forms. And this is the first one that we built, about a 15,000 square foot building, just to kind of get things started. We've had a lot of mining companies come to us. They're mining potash in the area. It's really booming there. They come to us and they say, well, you guys are, when you're doing business, we'd like to do business with you guys. What can we buy from you? And it's kind of like, well, a round of golf, I guess. I don't know. We didn't really have anything to sell them, right? So we started looking at all the opportunities in the resource industry that were passing us by. So we decided the only way to jump in and take advantage of them was, again, through partnerships. It takes too long to start up our own company. We don't have enough money to acquire somebody. So we developed some partnerships with those companies that you can see there. This is just something we've done in the last year. And we just got a couple contracts with BHP Billiton in the potash mining and with Cameco uranium mining for, I think, a little over $7 million worth for the first year. So that's another kind of strategy for us to get engaged with the stuff that's going on. So what are the economic impacts of all of this? Well, again, going back to what we were trying to do, it's creating revenue streams for us. We initially thought it was going to be business profits, where all the money was going to be. It's turned out that's not where all the money is. The money is actually in the other sources, in the land leases, in the taxation, in the utility payments, and there's no risk in those either, right? There's risk in the business side of things, but not in the other side of things. So we take that money and then we reinvest it into our social programs, into our health programs, things like that. So that's the results, kind of the work to date, and we've got about 1 million people coming out. It's created about 670 jobs. We've got about 250 people in the community that are working age. So the rest of the labor comes from outside the reserve, from the surrounding rural area. People come there to work, and now they want to come and work and live there and play there. That's the result for unemployment rates from when Chief Bear got in. We're now kind of right around the provincial average. So it's been, we circle back to what our targeted results were at the beginning, and we're starting to make some headways in, we think, kind of each of those areas. So hopefully the themes of partnership and alliance have come through. That's kind of the way that Chief Bear and our council have set out our vision and set out our way of doing things. So that's what we've been up to the last little while. So thanks very much for your attention.